Okay, let's get started. Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining another SDEC session. My name is Adam Greco and I will be your moderator for this session. A couple housekeeping items before I turn it over to Fred. Um, as we're going through the session, if you have questions, please add them to the Zoom Q&A, which you might want to just pop open into another window if you happen to have multiple monitors or screen space. And then you can see the questions coming in, and feel free to ask questions anytime during this session. If you have any technical issues, you could use the chat function, and I will be monitoring the chat. I'll also be posting some useful links to you in the chat. So a couple other housekeeping things to let you know about. We do have a Slack group where we post all of the recordings of all of these webinars. For some reason, we only have about 2/3 of our members who are in the Slack group. So if you aren't in the Slack group, I'm going to be posting a link to the chat on how you can join. And we have 28 recordings in there. So if you've missed any past sessions, being in the Slack group is really critical. And it's free. There's no obligation. You just literally click a link and join. If you have other coworkers or friends who you think would benefit from these free digital analytics webinars, I'll be posting a link in the chat where you can invite them. We are just about today, I think we are going to pass the 3,000 member mark, which is really exciting. So we're looking for more members. Spread the love, spread all the free education that we're doing. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Fred, and he's going to be talking about GA and GTM debugging with Chrome extensions. So Fred, I'll hand it off to you.
All right, thank you, Adam. I'm really looking forward to this session. I've recorded it over the last 2 days to have the most recent information available. You'll see that there's some things that are going to change, but let's go ahead and start.
Welcome to the November 3rd session of the Search Discovery Education Community. Today we're going to try to take our minds off what's happening with voting in the US and focus instead on GA and GTM debugging using Chrome extensions. My name is Fred Pike. I'm a managing director and CFO at Northwoods, an agency in Shorewood, Wisconsin, right outside of Milwaukee. Today we're going to be covering these 6 different Chrome extensions. I'll go through them one by one and show you what I love about each of them. We're going to start off with absolutely nothing in our Chrome extension bar, and we'll end up with all 6 installed. Let's get started with the first one, the Google Tag Assistant. And I can let you know it's going to be a little bit confusing because recently Google Tag Manager changed their preview mode to be called the Tag Assistant, and that's not what we're going to be talking about here. We're talking about the Chrome extension, not the GTM preview mode. The other thing is that Google Tag Assistant doesn't currently recognize GA4, Google Analytics 4, which rolled out in mid-October, which makes me think, boy, it's going to change. So what you're going to see on screen right now today may look very different tomorrow or a week from now. I know it's going to change, but what we're going to be covering today, I'm sure will be around in the new version when it comes out. So let's dive into it. All of our Chrome extensions you will find on the Chrome Web Store. And for each extension, I'll show you what the page looks like. The first site we're going to look at is a demo site I created using the Titan Content Management System. We have Google Tag Assistant installed. If I click on that, you'll notice that it's not currently running, but I'm going to enable it and then refresh the page. And now I have a 1 showing up, and I have the first indication from Google telling me that the installation of analytics on my website is correct so far. I have a green smiley face, which means that Google Analytics is set up correctly. Great. Let's make this a little bit more complicated and install Google Tag Manager to run Universal Analytics and let's install Google Analytics 4 using GTag, the global site tag. I've done that in the Titan admin section. This section here is GA4. This is the measurement ID. This section is Google Tag Manager for Universal Analytics, the older version of Analytics, which also requires a no-script snippet immediately after the opening body tag. Now let's see how Tag Assistant deals with this slightly more complicated setup. It recognizes Google Tag Manager and it has a green smiley face. Google Analytics is now in blue, and that's really typical. If GA is installed through Google Tag Manager or through GTag, it's going to show up as blue, and it says it's a non-standard implementation. That's actually not true. That works just fine. What's not working quite yet in Tag Assistant is the global site tag for GA4. This, again, is the measurement ID for GA4. And Tag Assistant doesn't know what to do with Google Analytics 4 quite yet. I think that'll be changing quickly, as I mentioned earlier. So Tag Assistant will tell you if it thinks that the Google tags you've installed are actually installed properly. And it's kind of good at telling you that. But the really cool thing, the great thing that I love about Google Tag Assistant is the record function. And let's dive into that next. For the recording example, I'm going to use our own site, nwsdigital.com. If we look at the Google Tag Assistant, you can see that there's a little bit more on this site than the demo site that we saw previously. We are going to click on record, and I always leave this checked. If I want to include this page, the home page that I'm on, in my recording, I have to refresh the page. And let's just go through a little bit of the website. So we'll go to one page, we'll go to another page. Let's look at my most recent blog, and let's just scroll down some. So what's going to happen is that we will have captured some page views and some Google Analytics events. You can tell that the recording is working because there's that little red dot, and now we're going to stop the recording. And we're going to show the full report. So 4 pages were tracked, 20 tags were fired. Let's take a look at what we tracked. The Tag Assistant recordings are broken down into 2 different sections, the Tag Assistant report and the GA report. For this session, I'm just going to look at the Google Analytics report, which I think is more valuable most of the time. If you're logged into an account that has access to the Google Analytics for the site that you just recorded, you can actually choose the views that you want to look at. So let's choose actually 2 of them. The first place I'll look is the alerts. There are no alerts found. If there were issues, they would show up here. Where I typically will look is the flow, and that shows you where the session started and what pages you looked at. You can see that on this first page, there is a page view hit, a site speed hit, and a Google Analytics event, a top nav interaction. If we look at the page view, you can see the unfiltered view and the main view. And you can see one thing that's interesting is that I have a lowercase filter set up in my main view to switch like that capital B, that capital G, all to lowercase so that it's more consistent in the GA interface. You can see the effect of that filter, again, only in my main view, showing up right here. So with the recordings, we can verify that a filter is working, but we can go a bit further too. We can check to see if our IP filters are working, or potentially if we have a country filter, if that's working. So let's see how we do that. We're going to change the location and use an IP address, the one that I'm currently on. And now Tag Assistant is going to run this same recording as if it was coming from that IP address. And let's go down to our flow again. Here's our first unfiltered view, and here's our filtered view. And now notice that that hit was dropped by the filter exclude northwards traffic, NWS traffic. So we know that that IP filter is working. And what is really great about this is that if I'm setting up IP filters for clients, I can't go to their office necessarily and test that IP address, but I can test it here in the view and make sure that the filter that I set up works, which is really great. The other thing you can do is change your actual city or region or country. And let's say that I'm blocking traffic from Russia. Again, if we go to our view summary, we're running this recording again as if we were coming from Russia. And let's look at our flow. And now the unfiltered lets that hit go through. But in the filtered view, where I have a filter called exclude some country traffic, the hit doesn't go through. That visit doesn't go through to GA. So another great way to test it. And this, I think, is so powerful. This is why I love Tag Assistant, because it's really hard to test IP filters or country filters or things otherwise, but you can do it here with a recording in Tag Assistant, which is just great. The other thing I want to mention before we leave is that if we look at like one of our pages, we're getting page views, we're getting site speed hits, but we're also getting Google Analytics events. So for example, on the GA4 setup page that we were on, we got a scroll depth hit of 25%. So that's another way that you can test that the Google Analytics events that you've set up are actually being tracked. What about errors and alerts in Google Tag Assistant? Well, I couldn't find a misbehaving website to show you, but I do have a screenshot of a problem I ran into a while ago. Here's the recording I created on that page, and you can see there's a page load 1 and 2, and the session doesn't start until page load 3, which means 1 and 2 weren't recorded, and we have issues with 4 and 5, and 5, in fact, it's saying the page did not send a hit. So there was definitely something going on here that was stopping visitor sessions from being sent to Google Analytics. Turned out to be a cookie issue, but without the Tag Assistant recording capabilities highlighting some of the errors, it would have been way harder to figure out what was going on. Time for a new Chrome extension. This one is closely related to the Google Tag Assistant. It is also from Google, and it's called the Google Analytics Debugger. I already have it installed, and in fact, it shows up at the top here, GA Debug. Every Chrome extension from here on out uses the developer tools or the developer console or the console. The way you call that up, you can either do Control-Shift-I, you can call it up through the developer tools, you can press F12, there's multiple ways to call it up. And what that's going to do is open a new window, and you can place where that's going to be on the side, either left or right, or in a separate screen. Let's take a look at what that does on our demo site. I mentioned it was very closely related to Google Tag Assistant. If we look at the Google Tag Assistant, there's a couple of things we can do. One is we can turn on the GA Debug, that Chrome extension we just downloaded. We can have it on automatically. And two, we can also have the Google Tag Assistant be turned on automatically all the time. As you may remember, when I first called up the Google Tag Assistant, I had to enable it. If you have it on auto validation on, you would not have to enable it. Personally, I prefer it off, but it's a choice. So we have GA Debug on. Let's call up the developer console, F12. And what we get is a lot of information about the hits that are being sent to Google Analytics. So it tells us how GA is being initialized, what our UA number is. We're going through Google Tag Manager. We are sending a page view. Here's the actual beacon that was sent. Here's the details of what's in that hit. Notice how the T is a hit type, so it's a page view. The UL is the language. It's English US. So it breaks down all the information about the hit going to Google Analytics. And it's really great when you're faced with a Google Analytics issue that just does not make any sense why it's not working right. That's when I call up the Google Analytics debugger. Now, frankly, I don't use the Google Analytics debugger that much. The next tool that we'll talk about, I tend to use more. But I know some really good analysts who are always in the Google Analytics debugger. Part of what I don't like about it is that it's very verbose. Let's go over to the Northwood site and I'll show you what I mean. Here's what we're sending with one page to GA, and you can see how much room it takes up in the developer console. So like I said, it can be very verbose, which can be very useful when you're trying to troubleshoot something, but can be a pain in the butt otherwise. Pain in the butt or not, it's a great tool to have in your tool set, and as I mentioned, it is closely associated with the Google Tag Assistant. The next Chrome extension we're going to talk about is the Data Layer Inspector Plus from AdSwerve. This is, honest to God, one of my favorite Chrome extensions. So what, you may ask, is a data layer? A recent SDEC session was taught by this guy, Julius, from Analytics Mania, and he talked all about what the data layer is. So if you're not totally sure, I would go back and watch his session. But very quickly, the data layer is a place where information can be stored. Your website might send that information there. For example, the page view information might have the title of the page, the URL of the page, etc. GTM can read that data. That data can be pushed into GTM or it can react to that data. And then Google Tag Manager is going to send maybe a page view out to Analytics. It might send remarketing information out to Google Ads. It might also send a purchase event or a page view out to Facebook, etc. So the data layer is hugely important in analytics. And again, it's just a temporary repository of data where the website can send data and GTM can read it. So the Data Layer Inspector Plus opens up that magical world to us. And when I first saw this, when Charles Farina, who is another speaker in SDEC, he talked about this in a CXL class that I was taking years ago, and oh my God, it was so exciting to realize that yes, anybody could look at what was happening behind the scenes of a web page. So let's look at an example. Let's go to the Northwood site again, and we're going to call up the developer console. Again, I can press F12, the tools, and now you see some more information in the console than we saw before. So we're seeing a data layer push of the GTM.js. That's the push that happens when the GTM container is first loaded. We have the DOM loaded, the document object model loaded, and in our case, we fire a page view. GTM for Northwoods fires a page view on the DOM loading. If we open that up, and by the way, all this information is coming from Data Layer Inspector Plus, and it's the one that highlights this page view. If we open that up, we have information that looks like what we saw with the Google Analytics debugger, right? Except it's just not broken out quite as much. But if you forget what some of these things are, you can always click here, and now it breaks down the short code into what it actually is. Remember we saw T before for page view? Now it's telling us that it's a hit type of page view, so it breaks it out more. So that's one of the nice features of the Data Layer Inspector Plus. The amazing thing is that I don't have to have access to the Tag Manager environment or the Google Analytics or anything for a site to run the Data Layer Inspector. I can run it on any site. But let's say that I was coming to this site and I wanted to see how they had set up a couple of different Google Analytics events. One of the things I do when I'm looking at a website, either our own or anybody's, I like to look at two different things to give me a sense for how they've set up event tracking. I like to look at outbound links i.e. links that go from this website to a totally different domain, and how they deal with social media. We'll be able to do that in Northwood's case because we have all the social media icons in the footer, and those will both be social media and outbound links. So let's see what happens when we go to the Facebook link. We see 3 different events fire on that one click. We get a social media event C. EC is event category, which, as you know, with Google Analytics events, that's the big bucket. EA is the event action, follow Facebook, and EL is the event label, the page that we're on. But that single click is also an outbound link, again, EC event category. It's clicked from the home page, that's the event action, and the event label is where it's going. And then finally, it's also a footer interaction event category. The event action is click on Facebook, and the event label is from page, home page, the root directory. So I can see that that one click is being tracked 3 different ways through 3 different types of GA events. And this actually makes me feel pretty good because to me, the heart and soul of a really good Google Analytics setup are the events that are being tracked. We could open up any of these events. Let's just choose one of them. Here's the EC, the event category, and actually let's spell the whole thing out. So we have the event category, the event action, the event label, all the custom dimensions that I'm tracking. So if I was just coming to this website without knowing anything about NWS Digital, I would look at this and say, oh, looks like they have a fairly decent Google Analytics setup. And I can make that determination without having access to Google Analytics, without having access to Google Tag Manager, just from what I'm seeing in the data layer. And of course, in this case, where I have access to analytics, where I have access to Google Tag Manager for Northwoods, I can be testing that the events I set up are actually firing correctly. So I don't have to go into the Google Tag Manager preview and debug mode. I can do it right here through the data layer inspector. We just looked at what happens when you click on a Facebook icon on the Northwoods site. And one of the things it does is a social media follow. But to me, that click is not as valuable as when someone shares a blog post or a page on social media. And using the data layer inspector, let's look at what happens with one of the Northwoods blog articles. We'll pick on my most recent one. If I click on this share button, I get a different event, social media share to Facebook, along with what page I was actually sharing. Again, setting up Google Analytics events is the heart and soul of GA, and you can see some of that reflected here on the Northwood site and in Data Layer Inspector. Finally, what about GA4? Does that get tracked as well? Well, it kind of does. Let's go back to our coffee shop, our demo site, and let's call it the Developer Console. You can see that there is one page view, the normal Universal Analytics page view. There is also this second one called GA-V2 page view. Google Analytics 4, when it was in beta, it was called GA App and Web. And a lot of people called it GA-V2 because it was supposedly the second version of GA, but it's actually GA4 once it got published. But when you look in Data Layer Inspector, you'll see that they're calling it GA-V2, and my guess is that at some point in the future, probably not too far away, they will change to calling that GA4. But for right now, if you ever see GA-V2 in Data Layer Inspector, you're looking at a GA4 hit. Let's explore another site now and see how a different Chrome extension will help us here. So I'm on porterandyork.com, which is supposedly one of the best examples of an e-commerce store using WooCommerce on WordPress. Let's check our Google Tag Assistant. And we have GA set up through Google Tag Manager. Let's call up the Developer Console. We have our page view, which we've seen before. We also have some product events, interesting. So those are coming from the enhanced e-commerce implementation on this site. And we can see an event here, the EEC, the enhanced e-commerce impressions. So this event got pushed into the data layer. As a result, Google Tag Manager reacted to that data layer push and sent an enhanced e-commerce event to Google Analytics. Anytime I'm working with enhanced e-commerce sites, I like to use a different Google Chrome extension, and that's the GTM GA debug extension from Thinkster, David Vallejo, who's this wonderful Spanish developer. I now have it enabled. There's GTM GA debug, and let's call that up. You may notice that it's showing up in our console, so let's click over to that. And it won't fire by default. You have to actually call it up in the console and then refresh the page. What I like about GTM-GA debug is the way it presents the information. It's going to present almost the same information that we saw with the AdSwerve Data Layer Inspector Plus, but it puts it in a better format, an easier to understand format in some ways. So for example, it breaks things out by events that are related to Google Tag Manager, information that's related to GA, so the page view, for example. Here's all that information that we've seen in the Data Layer Inspector Plus. It also has it by enhanced e-commerce. As I start scrolling down, something popped up, and let's take a look at that. We got a product impression, and it's telling us it has displayed the top sirloin cap, the natural Orleans chicken breast, and the natural French pork chop, and those are going to be right there. We just passed them. Now we have some more product impressions. We have the filet mignon and the bacon wrapped filet mignon. So let's talk a little bit about what are the things I'm looking for when I'm debugging an enhanced e-commerce site. At a very high level, I want to make sure that product impressions are being measured, and we saw the beginning of that. I want to make sure that the add to cart is working, as well as the remove from cart, and that the product itself, whatever you added or removed from the cart, is specified, which doesn't happen a lot of times. And finally, a proper EEC implementation requires that the complete order information be included on checkout step 1. So there's way more things to EEC, but these are some of the things that I look at. Let's see how Porter and York is doing. Let's go back to the site and call up the developer console. Switch to GTM GA debug, refresh the page, and we'll add something to the cart. Let's do the Brazilian picanha. We have one enhanced e-commerce hit, which is product details. Great. So we know the category, the ID, the product name, the product price. If we add it to the cart, enhanced e-commerce here, we have the product add to cart, and it tells us what we added. Okay, that's good so far. Let's see what happens when we go to the cart itself. Here's the cart, and let's say we want to add some more. So we've gone from 1 to 2, we update the cart, and look, nothing happens down here. We don't capture that add to cart. Okay, that's a bit of a problem. What happens if we remove from cart? Again, nothing happens down here. So already I can tell this isn't a great EEC implementation because some of the add to carts and remove from carts are not working. Let's go to checkout. We have an enhanced e-commerce. We have checkout step 1, and there's nothing being sent here. So remember, in step 1 of an EEC implementation, we should have the full order. Our enhanced e-commerce shows nothing, no products. If we look at the GTM tag, this EEC checkout page, which I've already blown out, this is step 1, and it should have everything that we ordered, but you can see it's all undefined. So I'm not going to go any further, but I already know that we have some issues in Porter & York's checkout process. And note that Porter & York is not a client of mine. I actually don't know them, although I'm probably going to buy one of these picanhas because I love picanha. But I can tell that they have some issues, at least with the way it's set up. Again, pulling back the curtain to their website, I get a lot of information about what's going on and how well implemented their GA and EEC is, and it's not great. The final thing I want to do with GTM GA Debug is show you how it works in a GA4 environment. You can see that's it right here, but it's grayed out, which means there's no GA4 on this site. But we do have it on our demo site. I've already loaded it up. So we have GTM information, GA information, which is Universal Analytics, GA4F. We have one event in GA4, the page view, and here's some information about it and the raw payload details. So GTM GA Debug is already cognizant of GA4 and will give you information about all the events that the browser is sending to GA4. And for those who are becoming GA4 nerds, you can see that this event category, the page view, is part of the enhanced measurement events within GA4. In our final minute or so before we go into Q&A, I want to talk very, very briefly about two other Chrome extensions that I use quite a bit. The first one is Edit This Cookie, and the second one is Link Redirect Trace. And I now have both of them showing up in my browser. Edit This Cookie, Link Redirect Trace. Edit This Cookie is basically a way to either change the values of a cookie, or the way I use it way more often is just to delete all the cookies and start afresh. So I can start a new session or whatever by deleting my cookies. And I often do this when I'm trying to implement a GDPR solution. I just want to clear all the cookies that I had set. Link Redirect Trace will tell you how you got to the page that you ended up on. So for example, if I type northwoodsoft.com, that was our old domain, which we changed last May. I'll press enter. That's going to redirect to NWS Digital. And I know that by going to Link Redirect Trace. Here's what I typed in. I got a 301 redirect to NWS Digital, and that's what actually gave me the 200, which is the good return code. It also gives me some other information. For example, this is indexable by every bot. So I don't have a robots.txt file that is killing my SEO, for example. And this is a very useful tool at times to really see how you got to a particular page. I remember one time where it helped us debug a 301 redirect loop that we seem to be having, where we went from one page to the other, back, and we just kept looping back and forth until finally it died, and we have this recommendation that Google says there shouldn't be more than 5 hops in a redirect chain. Well, yeah, there was 11 or so or whatever here. We had a problem, and Link Redirect Trace helped us find it. Those are the Chrome extensions that I think every digital analyst should have. Google Tag Assistant, Google Analytics Debugger, AdSwerve Data Layer Inspector Plus, GTM GA Debug, Edit This Cookie, and Link Redirect Trace. Chrome extensions that I can't live without, and I hope you've enjoyed this walkthrough. Now we'll open up the floor to questions.
Awesome. Okay, thanks so much, Fred. Sorry for some of those who are having a little bit of blurriness. We tried something a little bit different today with having a recording, and for some of those, it may not have been clear. We're hoping that the recording will be much clearer, so when you check out the Slack group, you'll be able to hopefully see anything that you missed. If you can, please add all questions to the Q&A. I see a couple of them are coming in the chat. If you can, please add your questions to the Q&A area now, and we will start picking those off and tackling those now. So, Fred, I'll just read out some of the questions as they're coming in.
Sounds good.
First one, Can you use debuggers, or it says this debugger, but I assume there may have been a couple you showed, if you're only using GA and not using GTM?
Oh, absolutely. All 6 of these would work in a GA only environment or a GTM environment. So yep, they can all be used with GA.
And I'm seeing a bunch of people asking for links to all of the extensions. So if you want to share that with me, Fred, afterwards, I could post that into our Slack group as well.
Perfect. Yep, I'd be happy to do that.
Okay, next one. What's the benefit of using the edit this cookie extension in place of just deleting your cookies in Dev Console?
Oh, no, that's a great question, and I know a lot of people will just do it in Dev Console. To me, it's just one click and they're gone. So that's why I like that. Plus, you can edit the cookie, which I do occasionally from obviously from edit this cookie. So if you're used to deleting the cookies from DevCon, that works just fine too.
Okay. Alex says, are you familiar with the Data Slayer extension? And if so, would you recommend it for specific use cases, or is it inferior to any other extension that you would recommend?
Yeah, Alex, that's a great question. So when I first got into this and discovered Data Layer Inspector Plus, I also had Data Slayer installed, and this was a few years ago. And I don't remember why I like Data Layer Inspector Plus more. I just know that I did. And frankly, I haven't followed Data Slayer in a while. It does very similar things. I know Data Layer Inspector Plus will work with Adobe Analytics, it'll work with Telium, it'll work with some more other tag systems. So that might be part of the reason. I don't know if Data Slayer does that, but they're doing essentially the same thing as far as I remember from Data Slayer. So if you really like Data Slayer, that's totally fine.
Okay, yep. And we have another person, Steve, who seems to be a fan of Data Slayer as well. So next one, if a client of our, Alex had mentioned a client of his uses Telium instead of GTM, would you swap out any of your extension recommendations, or do they still apply if someone's using Telium?
Well, the Google Tag Assistant wouldn't be that helpful. The Ad Serve Data Layer Inspector Plus does report on Telium. So I know, for example, Patagonia switched last February, they switched from GTM and GA to Telium and GA. So I still look at their site using these tools, and it gives me the information that I'm looking for. Not that I work with Patagonia, it's just a brand that I love.
Okay. Do you have any suggestions or tips for debugging within the new GTM preview experience?
Yeah, boy, that's a switch, isn't it? That GTM preview. So one thing is that you really want to have the tag assistant, the Google Tag Assistant, the Chrome extension. You want to have that enabled because that actually makes the GTM preview mode a little bit better. I think it'll put it in a separate window as opposed to a pop-up. In terms of just debugging within GTM, I do like the new preview mode with its history of all the pages that you've been on. That's what I think was missing before. And that's one thing that the Data Layer Inspector Plus had going for it. But I think you can use both tools. So when I'm doing GTM debugging, I've got the preview mode open and I have the Data Layer Inspector Plus open, and it gives me different information. They're both complementary. So I tend to use both.
Okay. A little bit of an maybe unrelated tangential question here. Can you implement GA4 without Google Tag Manager?
Yeah, absolutely. And Google is strongly pushing people to use GTag, the global site tag, for implementing GA4. And GTag is great if you're only using Google products, but if you want to use other products, other tags like Facebook or Hotjar or whatever, those can't be implemented via GTag. So I put them all in GTM. I use GTM for everything. I mean, I think it's a great product, and I'm not sure why you wouldn't use it. But yes, you can implement GA4 without GTM.
And just so everyone on the line knows, we are actually doing a last-minute addition a couple weeks from now to have a session on GA4. Since it just came out, we're going to have a session on how to migrate to GA4, so be on the lookout for that invite soon. Next question. Do you have any suggestions about troubleshooting single-page applications and AJAX sites?
Yeah, boy, those can be tricky to debug, and the data layer inspector has been really valuable for me in the past, because with the SPA, you basically need to have something being pushed to the data layer when a virtual page happens, and it's hard to see if that push has happened without the data layer inspector or potentially data slayer. But I use the AdSwerve extension all the time for SPAs. And I don't think I've done much with AJAX sites, but I think it would follow the same advice.
Okay, another question. Are you familiar with WASP? I know WASP has been out for many, many years. I think that was Stefan Hamel. We use it frequently for new clients when we're auditing their overall setup.
So I've worked a tiny bit with WASP. I wouldn't say I know it well at all. So I would say the answer is no.
Yeah, and someone actually replied, Zach replied saying, so there's a comment that you could see to the question there, so that it's helpful to see which tags are responsible for the most third-party JavaScript. Then another question, I'm using GTM, GA debug now. Should I use AdSwerve as well? What additional information does it provide?
So they're complementary, obviously. The advantage of AdSwerve is that it's more compact. You've got you have all the events and page views, whatever, in a much smaller space than what you're seeing in GTM GA debug. What I like about GTM GA debug is the way it breaks out all the different, you've got the GTM items, you've got the GA items, you've got the GA4 items, you've got the enhanced e-commerce. All those are broken out into separate buckets. So when I really want to focus on just the EEC, I prefer to use the GTM GA debug, just because I can just look at those events and firing things.
Okay, last question we have here is, what are your thoughts on the observe point debugger? Have you ever tried that one out?
I have not tried that one, Mackenzie. Sorry.
Yeah, I've used that one a little bit myself. For some reason, I find that one to be a little bit more helpful in the Adobe Analytics world, but that's just maybe my perspective, because I do a little more with Adobe Analytics, but I'm sure it does both. So cool. Well, I think that wraps it up for today. So Fred, thank you so much. And thanks everyone for joining. When we originally scheduled this, I wasn't thinking and realizing that here in the US, it's quite a big day. So get out there and vote if you haven't voted already in the US. But thank you so much, Fred. It's been great having you on.
My pleasure. And I apologize for the video quality, but we'll get it better in the replay.
Yep. Awesome. Okay. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.